The night is quiet now, and in the distance, the wind hums through trees older than memory. You are not in the modern world anymore. No screens, no engines, no deadlines, only firelight and the slow breath of the earth beneath you. We are traveling back, not just through centuries, but into the beating heart of a kingdom carved in stone. The kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. Here, thousands of years before skyscrapers rose, a people built cities without mortar, stone upon stone, singing into place, balanced with skill, memory, and magic. But this is not just a story of greatness. No, this is the tale of those who toiled beneath it, who bled in the mines, who vanished into tunnels deep in the belly of the earth, their lives feeding the wealth of kings, the gold that glittered in the palaces, the cattle counted like stars. It all came from below, from dust, from sweat, from hands cracked and trembling in the dark. And so, tonight, we listen to a story untold by textbooks, two voices buried beneath empires, to the silence behind the stones. The kingdom of Great Zimbabwe, a place of wonder, of politics, of power, and of deep sorrow for the ordinary soul. So lay your head down gently, and let us begin. Let the fire crackle softly now, and we drift beneath the stars, beneath the dust, life in the mind. Us slowly over the ancient hills of southern Africa, casting long golden shadows across the dry. Birds begin to chirp in the thorn trees, their songs soft but persistent. The air is still cool, but the promise of heat hangs heavy, waiting to settle like a thick blanket over the land. In the distance, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe rise from the earth like the bones of giants. The massive stone walls, crafted without mortar, curve gracefully with the land. But while these walls are celebrated today, the true backbone of this ancient empire lies hidden, deep beneath the ground. Let us go now, gently, into the shadowy world of the gold miners, the forgotten souls whose sweat and blood fed the kingdom's glory. The miners were not slaves, but they were far from free. Most were commoners, conscripted or obligated by duty, taxes, or social debt to work in the mines. These were not the glittering mines of legend, where nuggets of gold lay waiting to be scooped by lucky hands. No, these were small, tight, dark veins. Narrow shafts dug deep into rock, barely wide enough for one thin man to squeeze through. The tools were rudimentary. Wooden wedges, stone hammers, and antelope horn chisels. The gold ore was encased in hard quartz, which had to be broken and carried to the surface in baskets made of grass or hide. A full basket might weigh 30 kilos. A man might carry 10 of these in a day. Their hands were always bleeding, their backs always sore. Cap-cut, prompt. Young Shona man, inside a dim, hand-dug mining tunnel, holding a small basket and primitive pickaxe, sweat glistening on his forehead by torchlight. And the air, oh, the air. Down in those cramped shafts, there was little to breathe. The further one went, the more stale and hot it became. Miners lit small torches from animal fat or dry reeds, but the smoke lingered thick in the low ceilings. Many coughed constantly. Many more lost their breath forever, trapped by cavins or slowly suffocated in collapses of earth and dust. The fear was ever present. Mothers would kiss their sons goodbye in the morning, not knowing if they'd return. Fathers would come home coughing blood. Food was sparse and plain, a thick porridge made from sorghum or millet, with perhaps a few wild greens if one was lucky. Water was carried in calabashes from nearby springs, often muddy or bitter, and on some days there was dried meat, mostly goat or guinea fowl, but never enough. Gold may have glittered for the kings, but for the miner it was just another stone, just heavier to carry, just harder to live for. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The miner's body aged fast. Boys began working by 12, sometimes younger. By 30, many were broken. Their spines curved from years of bending, their teeth cracked from grit in the food, and their lungs filled with the slow dust of death. But it wasn't just the body that suffered. There was loneliness. The mines were far from the villages. Deep in the hills or beneath hidden valleys, men would live for weeks in makeshift shelters, sleeping on cold earth, away from their wives and children. There were songs to keep spirits up. There were rituals to keep spirits away. Before entering a mine, some men would smear red ochre on their foreheads. Others whispered to the ancestors, leaving bits of food near termite mounds. Gold was sacred. It belonged to the land. To disturb it was to tempt spirits, both good and ill. Occasionally, a man would emerge from the shaft wide-eyed, speaking nonsense. He would throw himself to the ground, foaming at the mouth. The elders would say a spirit had followed him out. Something old, something angry. He would be taken to the healer, who would burn herbs and chant until the man fell silent. Sometimes he never woke again. Let's pause here for a moment. The wind sighs through the hills, and the earth holds its breath. And yet they kept digging, because gold meant tribute. Gold meant power. Gold meant trade with Swahili merchants at the coast who brought cloth and beads and salt. Gold meant that the king, high on the hill complex, could feast and sacrifice and command. The miner saw none of that. He only saw dust. He only felt hunger. He only feared collapse. But in his heart, there was still pride, because every stone he chipped, every basket he lifted, every ounce of gold he unearthed, helped build a kingdom. Not just the walls of great Zimbabwe, but the idea of it, the heartbeat of a nation made from stone and sweat. At night, the men would lie on their mats and talk. Stories of home, dreams of cattle, hopes that the rains would come early, that the millet would grow tall, that their children would live longer than they did. They would laugh, too. Even underground lives find joy. A joke about a lazy miner who claimed his pickaxe was cursed. A song about a foolish spirit who mistook a chicken bone for gold. The fire would flicker, the drums would whisper from a distant village, and the stars so bright in the African sky would keep watch. Let's pause here for a moment. The laughter fades into the night, and the embers glow faintly in the dark. These mines, you see, were more than holes. They were tombs and wounds. They buried men. They birthed nations, and they remind us that history is not only made by kings and warriors, but also by those who toil in silence, by those who give more than they ever get, by those whose names are lost, but whose legacy is carved in stone. The next time you see a golden artifact in a museum, or a photograph of Great Zimbabwe's mighty walls, remember the miner. Remember his cough. Remember his hands. Remember his firelight. Cap-cut prompt. Fading image of a weathered miner's hands holding a chunk of ore, slowly transitioning into a golden bracelet in a museum glass case. Let us close this first story now. The dust settles in the shaft, and the stars rise high above the hills. The kingdom sleeps, and so do we. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Hunger, heat, and hope. The miners' meager rations, the sun had barely risen beyond the rolling hills of the southern plateau, but already the air shimmered with a dry, relentless heat, the kind of heat that crept into the bones before midday, soaking clothes with sweat, drawing salt from the skin, and pushing every breath closer to exhaustion. The miners of Great Zimbabwe theme, muscled silhouettes against the dust rose early, not out of ambition or choice, but out of necessity, for gold did not wait. And the rulers atop the hill complex demanded its glow like the sun demanded the earth. But before descending into the throat of the earth, the men stopped for sustenance. And what did they have? A meager portion, a handful of sorghum porridge, sometimes clumped with crushed pumpkin seeds. On rare days, it was cooked with wild greens, foraged by children or elder women from the dry fringes of the bush. Most often, it was plain flavorless, but filling. Beside it, a calabash of thin, fermented beer, brewed from millet or maize. Not strong, but sour and light. More a thirst quencher than a celebration, for the celebration belonged to someone else. Somewhere else. The beer had another purpose. It dulled the pain. Not fully, not permanently, but just enough to make the endless hours beneath the rock slightly more bearable. Just enough to blunt the aching knees and cracked fingers. There was seldom meat. Goat and cattle were wealth, not nourishment for miners. Chickens, too, were kept for eggs or trade. Meat, when it came through death or festivals, not daily life. The only protein, more often than not, came from termites, roasted in clay pans, or dried mo-pane worms, brittle and chewy, tucked into the miner's satchel like salted tokens of endurance. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the days stretched forward, hunger grew louder than the clanging of tools. There were no lunch breaks, as one might know them, today only moments, stolen between shifts. The mines offered no canteen, no shelter from the sun. Instead, miners crouched in the shadow of boulders or tree trunks, inhaling mouthfuls of leftover porridge wrapped in banana leaves or gourd husks. They drank from leather flasks or crude clay vessels' water when it was clean enough, though often it was drawn from shallow pits near the mines, murky and warm. When the rations ran out, and they often did, miners chewed on bitter roots to stave off hunger. Roots like the munhundo or mutoa, dug from the ground in secret when no overseer was watching. These were plants of survival, not flavor, and sometimes of danger. One root might ease the stomach, another might paralyze it. The older miners knew the difference. They passed this knowledge down like sacred memory, silent, slow, by gesture and name under breath. It was this knowledge that kept some alive, while others, younger and less cautious, fell ill and withered in their huts, their eyes glazed with the emptiness of malnutrition. Let's pause again. The wind sighs through the tall grasses, and we breathe. Evenings brought temporary reprieve. The sun dipped, the air cooled, and the body bruised and starved returned to its enclosure. Not home, not sanctuary, just rest. The miners' village was not the grand stone palace the kingdom is famed for. It was a ring of humble huts, thatched with dry reeds, floored with compacted earth. The walls were daubed with clay and ash, painted in ochre or charcoal patterns that told of ancestors, animals, or sacred hills. Inside, the miner shared space with his family, wife, children, perhaps an aging father too brittle for the mines. They, too, suffered the weight of gold, not in stone or darkness, but in hunger, worry, and waiting. A meal might be simmering. If the day had been kind, there could be groundnuts, crushed into a paste and stirred into the porridge, or boiled wild spinach, seasoned with ashes and salt from traded caravans. If not, it was water and silence. The children would ask questions. "Baba, did you find gold today?" And the miner, too tired to speak, would nod or shake his head or simply lift his calloused hand, motioning silence. The children didn't understand the full cruelty of the work, but they knew when Baba was in pain. They saw it in his slow steps. They felt it in the way he gripped their shoulders, not in affection, but to steady himself. Let's pause here for a moment. The flames settle low, and the night hums with quiet. Beyond the miner's hut, the night came alive. Crickets sang, baboons howled in the far distance, and sometimes drums pulsed softly from the hill complex above, a signal of ceremony or sacrifice. The miners were not invited. Their place was beneath the earth, beneath the ruling clan, beneath history. Yet still, the miner dreamed, not of palaces or cattle, but of his children eating well, of rest, of a time when his back no longer ached and his hands no longer trembled. Some miners whispered of escape, fleeing into the forests, westward toward the limp, but the elders discouraged such thoughts. The land beyond the stone walls held hyenas, lions, and worse, foreign clans who enslaved runaways or sacrificed them to unknown gods. So the miner stayed. He dug, he endured, he prayed, sometimes to Mori, the great creator, or to the ancestral spirits who once roamed the sacred hills. The ancestors, it was believed, listened. They could bring rain, fortune, healing, or madness. The miner, before sleep, poured water on the ground, murmured his family's names, and asked for strength. Not for wealth, not for glory, just strength. Let's pause here for a moment. A distant drum echoes softly, and our eyes grow heavy. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when the miner laughed. At weddings, at birth celebrations, around the fire, when someone retold the tale of a trickster who fooled the cattle chief, or the bird that danced better than the king. These moments stitched joy into the miner's spirit like tiny golden threads in rough cloth. Children danced, women, the old men beat mbaya, instruments thumbed pianos that shimmered with watery sound, each note like a ripple in a sacred lake. And for a few hours, the miner forgot the mine. But morning always came, and with it, the hunger, the heat, the call of gold. Let's pause here for a moment. The Mbira echoes into silence, and we drift with it. This part of the journey illuminated the fragile human rhythms of great Zimbabwe's mining class. In a kingdom often remembered for its architecture and mystery, it is easy to forget the stomachs that growled and the backs that bent, so the gold could flow to the elite. Behind the walls, beyond the ruins, there were lives fed on little more than porridge, prayers, and hope, and it is their footsteps we follow next. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire fades low, and we prepare to journey on. The fear beneath the stone, deep in the belly of the earth, where sunlight never dared to reach, the miner crawled, not walk-crawled. The gold-bearing veins of great Zimbabwe were not mighty caverns. They were narrow, twisting tunnels carved by hand, chisel, and fire. Stone against stone. Skin against soil. These shafts did not welcome the body, they punished it. Each foot forward was a squeeze between rock walls, some barely wider than the shoulders of a thin man. The deeper he went, the less he breathed not. Only because the air grew scarce, but because fear held the breath hostage. This was the miner's world, a world of heat, darkness, and whisper. And knees, his skin slick with sweat, light barely touching the stone walls. They descended with torches made from wrapped reeds soaked in animal fat. Flames flickered wildly, casting jittery shadows on uneven surfaces. The light danced, but it did not comfort. It revealed insects, bones, old tools, abandoned by those who never returned. Each shift below the ground was a gamble. Would the shaft hold? Would the breath last? Would the veins yield gold? Or would the earth once again betray its children? Let's pause here for a moment. The torch flickers, and the cave sighs with silence. There was no scaffolding, no iron support. The strength of the mine was the strength of stone, and the desperate prayers of those who dared disturb it. The walls moaned sometimes, just softly. A gentle groan in the distance. The elder miners warned the young. When the earth speaks, listen. Stop digging, back away. But the young, driven by reward or fear of punishment, often ignored the warnings. Those were the ones the earth kept. Some shafts collapsed without warning. One moment, a strike of the pickaxe. The next, thunder from above, dust everywhere, screams muted by stone, and then silence, complete. There were no rescue teams, no stretchers, just the other miners, staring at the sealed tunnel, wondering whether to dig or to mourn. Let's pause again. The silence of stone surrounds us, and we honor those who never rose again. It wasn't only the collapse that haunted them. There were spirits below. The Shona believed the earth was not empty. It was sacred. Beneath the layers of rock lived the Midzamu ancestral spirits who watched over the living. But if disturbed, disrespected, or angered, these spirits could bring madness, misfortune, or death. So the miners poured beer into crevices. They murmured songs under their breath. They tied charms of dried herbs and animal bone around their necks, blessed by spirit mediums in the villages above. Still, not all spirits could be. There were legends of shadows moving just beyond the torchlight, of whispers in the dark, of eyes glowing where no flame could reach. Whether these were ghosts of dead miners or ancient protectors of the gold, no one knew. But every miner knew the cold sweat of seeing movement in the dark and praying it was just a bat. And sometimes it wasn't spirits at all. It was other miners, desperate, starving, driven mad by hunger or grief. Some had lost their minds in the mine, wandering alone in forbidden shafts, living off marsh and bat meat, refusing to return to the surface. Their eyes were hollow, their teeth chattered from memories no one else could see, and if they approached you in the dark, you didn't ask questions. You gave them food, water, a charm, whatever you had, then you turned and prayed they wouldn't follow. Let's pause here for a moment. The mine grows quiet again, and the wind above reminds us that we are still alive. The deeper the shaft, the hotter it got. Air grew thin, and sweat clung to skin like a second skin. Some tunnels were so low the miners had to drag themselves forward on their bellies. Their ribs scraped the stone. Their elbows bled. Some tied strips of goatskin around their knees to protect them. But even those wore thin after days of crawling. The pickaxes were simple wooden shafts with iron heads shaped crudely in village forges. They dulled quickly and had to be sharpened over small coals before each shift. For finer work, the miners used sharpened stones, which chipped easily and could slice open fingers if handled carelessly. Their fingernails were often blackened with dust, their teeth yellowed from the smoke of torches and the dirt in their food. And still they worked. Why? Because gold was power. Not for them, but for the rulers. The Mombo on the hill, the spiritual elders, the traders who came with beads and cloth and salt. Gold meant cattle, cattle meant wives, wives meant sons, and sons meant legacy. The miner might not own gold, but his labor carved the path for the elite to sit atop the world. Let's pause here. The weight of history presses softly on our chests, and we breathe it in, slowly. Some days, a miner would strike something strange, not gold, but quartz, glowing white veins that shimmered unnaturally in the dark, or copper threads wrapped like snakes through the rock. These were to be left alone, the elders said. They were not meant for human hands. One young miner once took a chunk of quartz home, proud of its glow. That night, his wife his goats vanished into the bush. His hut caught fire. The next day, he returned the stone and never again spoke of it. Let's pause. A sacred silence settles around us as the mountain watches. When the miner finally emerged hours later, or sometimes not, at all his face was ash-grey with dust. His lips cracked. His lungs wheezed from the inhaled smoke and stone powder, but there was little rest. The overseers examined his sack. Gold dust, if found, was measured. If too little was offered, suspicion rose. They believed miners might be stealing, hiding flakes in their mouths, their clothes, their hair. Some were stripped and searched. Others were punished with beatings or food withheld. To protect themselves, miners often tied small woven pouches under their armpits or in the hem of their loincloths, containing only charms, not gold. But still, they were treated with distrust. And so, they walked home, limping, coughing, silent. Not all made it. The weakest collapsed by the path. Sometimes they were carried, sometimes left. There were no medals for endurance, no memorials for those who died unnamed in the tunnels. Yet every stone in the palace, every carved bird above the gate, carried their fingerprint. Let's pause here. The dust settles once more. and we honor the hands beneath the history. Beneath the grand stone towers and iconic soapstone birds lay a darker truth, a kingdom built on fear, sweat, and sacrifice. The miners, unsung and unseen, gave their strength and sometimes their sanity for a gold they never touched in freedom. Their world was not one of celebration, but of survival in the dark. And yet, they endured. For hope is as stubborn as stone. Even in darkness, it glimmers. Let's pause one last time. The cave has released its secrets, and we return to the surface, step by careful step. Stones that touch the sky, building the great Zimbabwe ever wrote of a kingdom in stone, long before archaeologists stumbled over the ruins in hushed awe. There was only the land, the stone, and the vision. The story of great Zimbabwe does not begin with war. It begins with patience. 1,000 hands, 1,000 stones, a dream taller than trees, built one silent sunrise at a time. Let us walk slowly now, back through the mists of centuries, where the earth was red with purpose and every rock whispered its place. Let's pause here for a moment. The birds sing above the acacia trees, and the dust of old builders still lingers in the morning light. There were no cranes, no steel, no mortar. Yet the walls of great Zimbabwe rose like thunderclouds across the hills, curving elegantly, dancing with the landscape rather than defying it. These walls were drystone masterpieces, stones cut by hand, stacked with precision, fitted so closely you could barely slip a blade of grass between them. Each layer carried meaning. Each curve followed intention. This was not chaos. It was choreography. The builders chose granite not soft, but enduring. By heating it with fire, then cooling it quickly with water, they cracked boulders into usable pieces. Stone by stone, the great enclosure took shape. But why build it at all? Why stack stones so high they could hold back a flood? Why carve circles into a land that already had sky and spirit? Because monuments are memory, and the people of Zimbabwe, even then, understood legacy. There were 3 sacred zones. The hill complex perched atop a steep rise, wrapped in stone. Here, rulers performed rituals, consulted ancestors, and watched the land from above. The great enclosure down below, circular, immense. Possibly a royal residence, possibly a place of ceremony, certainly a statement of power. And the valley, ruined spread between the two, once filled with huts, market spaces, and homes for the elite. Together, these spoke of a kingdom that was not only rich, but architecturally sophisticated. Let's pause here. The stone walls breathe stories as the wind weaves through ancient doorways. To build these spaces required not just strength but unity. There were laborers who cut the stone, designers who oversaw placement, supervisors who tracked progress with beads and songs, and spiritual leaders who ensured the ancestors approved. Before each section of wall was laid, ceremonies were performed. Libations of millet beer were poured onto the earth. Goats were slaughtered. Smoke rose, and the builders sang not just for rhythm, but for blessing. In this, architecture became spiritual. Every arch was a prayer, every curve a circle of protection. And still the walls rose, some over 11 meters high, others over 250 meters long, a feat unmatched in sub-Saharan Africa at the time, not for war. There were no signs of attack or siege, no battlements or watchtowers, no arrow slits. These were walls of power, not of defense. Walls to impress, not suppress. Foreign visitors arrived with confusion. How could Africans build this? They asked arrogantly. Some claimed it was the work of Phoenicians, Arabs, or even King Solomon's men. But the truth was simpler and greater. Africans built it. The ancestors of the Shona, with their wisdom, patience, and stone sense, their fingerprints remain on every wall, their voices still echo in the curved silence of the ruins. Let's pause here. We listen not for echoes of empire, but for the heartbeat of a people who built with intention and love. In the surrounding valleys, life thrived. The people farmed millet and they herded cattle, not just for food, but for status and ceremony. They traded gold, ivory, cloth, and beads with Swahili coast merchants who passed the wealth along to Arabia, India, and even China. In return came glass, beads, ceramics, silks, and strange new words. But still, the heart of Zimbabwe was stone. Stone that shaped not just buildings, but belief. Children grew up learning the names of stones. Elders told stories of ancestors buried beneath towers. Weddings took place in sacred courtyards. Rain ceremonies were held beside stone altars, where spiritual mediums danced for the clouds. When the stone walls were complete, they did not stand apart from the people. They became the people, sheltering them, reflecting them, outliving them. Let's pause here. The rain begins to fall gently, like blessings returning to the soil. Today, only ruins remain, but they are not empty. They hold the sound of chisels, the laughter of builders, the pride of rulers, and the breath of spirits that still watch from the hill. Great Zimbabwe was not built in haste. It was not born of conquest. It rose from the earth slowly, like a baobab, tree-strong, rooted and wise. And even in ruin, it whispers to the world, we were here, and we were magnificent. The fall of the stone giant. How great Zimbabwe was abandoned. There are moments in history when silence grows louder than celebration, when the drumbeat slows, then fades, and the wind becomes the only voice among the stones. The walls of great Zimbabwe once buzzed with life, the smell of fire-roasted meat, the echo of cattle hooves in the valley, the laughter of children darting between stone alleys. But slowly, so slowly it changed. The fires grew cold, the cattle wandered off, the people left. Let's begin with the whispers of decline, of drought, of decisions made beneath stars. Let's pause here. The moon rises over quiet ruins, and we walk softly across the dust of forgotten footsteps. In the late 1400s, something shifted. Trade slowed. Walls began to crumble. And the people who once stood so proudly within these circles of stone disappeared. Not overnight, no conquest, no burning, just a gradual exhale. A kingdom, once breathless with glory, sighing into memory. What happened? Historians and archaeologists still debate, but the truth likely lies in a braided story of climate, conflict, and consequence. First came the land. For generations, the Shona people had drawn from the earth. They cut trees for fire and construction. They planted crops year after year. They grazed cattle across every hillside. But the land was finite, and even the richest soil grows weary. Deforestation crept across the hills. Erosion followed, and then the rains began to change. Drought whispered its name across the skies year after year. The crops no longer sang at harvest. The cattle grew thin, and the rivers, once swollen with life, became threads of thirst. Let's pause here. The fire crackles low, and we remember that even great empires need water. Second came pressure from without. By the 15th century, regional powers were shifting. New kingdoms like the Mutapa Empire to the north were rising. They learned from Zimbabwe, and then surpassed it. Great Zimbabwe had long been the center of trade. Gold flowed from its mines, ivory from its forests. Its merchants were known along the Swahili coast and beyond. But now, trade routes moved. New paths opened through rivers further north. Foreign merchants found new partners, and slowly, like a candle burning at both ends, Zimbabwe's economic flame began to flicker. What happens when your wealth walks away? The elite once draped in beads and perfumes found their power slipping. Gold that once bought silken incense now bought silence. The markets emptied. Foreign visitors grew rare, and the stone walls, though still tall, no longer echoed with deals and songs. And then came division within, the very architecture that once united the kingdom, the hill complex. The great enclosure, the sacred stone lines now became symbols of separation. Some clans wanted to preserve the old ways. Others saw opportunity elsewhere. Internal tensions grew. Who would lead next? Who held the favor of the ancestors? Was the land cursed? Or simply tired? Rather than fighting, they dispersed. People packed up quietly. Families followed cattle to greener lands. The elite sought new homes in the north, and so the walls remained, but the voices within them vanished. Let's pause here. Even stone cannot hold a people who are ready to move with the wind. By the time Portuguese explorers reached the region in the 1500s, Great Zimbabwe was already silent. They marveled at the stones. They scribbled confused reports. They guessed wildly at the builders. But no one lived there anymore. Just birds, dust, and stories carried in the breeze. The tragedy of Great Zimbabwe's fall is not one of violence. It is not a tale of conquerors and flames. It is the slower, gentler sadness of departure, of a civilization that reached its peak, then gracefully declined. And yet, even in decline, it did not lose its majesty. The ruins were not broken by war. They were simply left behind like a loved one who has passed on, honored with silence. Modern science reveals layers beneath the stones. Charcoal remnants show ancient cooking fires. Pottery shards hint at tastes and preferences. Buried beads whisper of trade, and soil samples tell of drought, of overgrazing, of trees once tall, now long gone. But the most powerful evidence, the stones themselves, still standing, still watching, still defying those who once believed Africa had no past worth remembering. Let's pause here. Not all ruins are sad, some are proud, resting from a long, beautiful journey. In recent times, Zimbabwe has reclaimed this history. The name itself, Zimbabwe, means House of Stone, a name chosen not from colonial maps, but from the bones of its own legacy. The stone walls of the past now shape the identity of a nation, its pride, its memory, its future. Great Zimbabwe may have fallen from power, but its story has risen again, spoken not in battle cries, but in bedtime stories, in whispered legends, in national symbols, and in dreams built on the strength of stone. Whispers in the wall, rediscovery, myth, and identity. There are stories etched not in books, but in stone, in curves and corners, in the silence between wind gusts and bird song. Great Zimbabwe is one such story. For centuries, it stood alone, abandoned, but not destroyed, quiet, but not forgotten, sleeping, until new eyes came looking, and with them came questions, assumptions, and sometimes lies. Let us walk slowly now through the rediscovery, not just of ruins, but of identity. Let's pause here. The coals of the fire glow orange, and the ancestors lean closer. When Europeans first laid eyes upon the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in the 16th century, they were astonished. Stone walls, 11 meters tall, circular enclosures without mortar, a civilization carved by African hands. They could not believe it. To them, Africa was the dark continent, a place of jungle and jungle alone. Not architecture, not science, not a kingdom built from gold. And so they rewrote the story. In the 19th century, men like Karl Marx, a German explorer, claimed that the ruins had to be built by outsiders. Phoenicians, perhaps Arabs, even the Queen of Sheba, he said. Anyone but black Africans. And in that denial, a theft occurred. Not of gold, not of cattle, but of memory. A people's pride was buried beneath foreign fantasy. Let's pause here. The wind sways the grass, but the stones do not flinch. But the truth could not sleep forever. In the early 20th century, African archaeologists and scholars began to challenge the lies. They studied the ruins with care, not as treasure hunters, but as children of the soil, seeking their grandparents' stories. They looked at pottery, carbon dating, and oral histories, and they found the truth had been there all along. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona. Its gold came from local mines, its wealth from African trade networks, stretching to the Swahili coast, Arabia, and even China. It was ours. And yet, even as the evidence grew, the colonial government resisted. They feared what the truth might inspire. A proud people, a united identity, a future rooted in an African past. Let's pause here. History, like water, will always find a way through the cracks. In 1980, the people reclaimed more than just a country. They reclaimed a name, Zimbabwe, the House of Stone, a name chosen not from British maps, but from granite walls that had whispered for centuries. The soapstone birds, sacred relics of the old kingdom, became national symbols. Not trophies, not museum pieces, but living spirits of the nation. Children learned in school about their ancestors, not as slaves or victims, but as builders, miners, traders, priests. The stones began to speak again, not with mouths, but with meaning. Great Zimbabwe is now a World Heritage Site. Its story is being retold in museums, documentaries, and fireside tales. But more importantly, it's being retold at home. Let's pause here. Under the baobab, a grandfather draws shapes in the sand for his grandchild. And yet, the ruins remain silent. They don't shout, they don't boast. They simply are a monument to craftsmanship, to legacy. The birds still fly overhead, the granite still warms beneath the sun, and the myths still swirl through the valleys. Was the hill complex a palace or a temple? Were the soapstone birds messengers of gods or symbols of kings? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps the stones were not built to answer, but to remind us that we once stood tall. Let's pause here and listen, not with ears, but with heart. So what is the legacy of Great Zimbabwe? Is it just a ruin? No, it is a mirror, one that reflects who we were and who we could become again. A story of brilliance, of mistakes, of wealth, decline, and rediscovery. A story that teaches that African history is not a gap between pyramids and colonization. It is a river wide and winding filled with kings, farmers, traders, engineers, artists, and warriors. We are the children of stone, of sun, of dust that remembers as the night deepens and the stars crowd the sky above the plateau. You might sit by the fire and feel it, the quiet presence of all who came before. The miner, the queen, the builder, the child. They do not need statues or parades. They built their memory into the earth itself, into every curve of granite, every bird carved from stone, every footstep still echoing faintly in the morning mist. They are still here, not gone, just waiting for us to listen. Let's pause here. The fire fades, the wind sighs, and the house of stone sleeps once more, unearthing the mystery of the soapstone birds before the pen, before the page, before ink was ever poured into bottles. Our ancestors carved meaning into stone, not with haste, but with reverence, not for fame, but for the spirit. Among the stones of Great Zimbabwe, there remain 8 figures, quiet, solemn, watching. These are the soapstone birds, symbols, totems, guardians. But what do they mean? Who were they meant for? And why, after all this time due, they still stir something deep in the African soul? Let's walk slowly through time, dust, and story to meet the birds who never flew, but always watched. Let's pause here. The embers settle, and the night grows gentle. Carved from steatite, a soft and workable stone, the birds are roughly 40 centimeters tall. They perch on zigzag platforms, each one unique yet united in form and presence. Their eyes are wide, their beaks sharp, and though they resemble hawks or eagles, none quite match a real bird. They are stylized, abstracted, intended not to mimic, but to embody. Found mostly within the hill complex, the spiritual heart of Great Zimbabwe, these birds were placed high on walls, as if to gaze down from above. Were they messengers to the ancestors, eyes of the gods, or emblems of a powerful dynasty? No one knows for certain, and perhaps that is their greatest power. Some scholars believe the birds represent the Betular eagle, a species sacred in many southern African cultures. The Betular is known for its agility in the air, and its role as a symbol of vision and connection to the heavens. Others say the birds are totemic ancestors, spirits of a royal bloodline, watching over the city long after their bodies return to earth. In Shona tradition, Certain families are linked to animals, birds, crocodiles, zebras, totems, called matupo, guide marriage rules, rituals, and identity. Could these birds, then, be totems of a royal clan? Perhaps, or perhaps, they are older than even that. Let's pause here. The fire crackles softly, and the birds still listen from their silent perch. When the colonial powers arrived, they too were captivated by the birds, but not out of reverence, out of desire. They took several of the statues, removed them from the ruins, and placed them in museums abroad, as if the story of great Zimbabwe could be told without its voice. But the people remembered. In the 1980s, as independence dawned and a nation reclaimed its roots, the soapstone birds became more than just relics. They became symbols of rebirth. They now feature on the Zimbabwean flag, on currency, on national seals, a silent bird, now soaring through the country's modern identity. Let's pause here. The birds are no longer prisoners in glass. They return slowly to the skies of story. Some believe the birds were part of ritual architecture. Placed high above, they may have marked the transition between the physical world and the spirit realm. The hill complex itself is divided by walls, passageways, and platforms, like a spiritual maze with the birds guiding the journey. In some theories, they also represented political authority. A king, no longer needing armies, used symbols like the birds to command respect. After all, what could be more powerful than to rule with the gaze of the ancestors, to let the spirits do the speaking? Let's pause here. Even the shadows hold stories. If you know how to look, others suggest an even deeper layer. The birds may not just be ancestors, but in traditional belief systems across the continent, certain animals are believed to carry messages between realms. The Betala eagle, especially, is said to circle above when the ancestors approve of a ceremony. So imagine this: a coronation, drums echoing through the valley, smoke rising from a sacred fire, and above the new king's throne, a bird of stone, silent, watching, blessing. No words needed, only presence. Let's pause here. The night deepens, and the bird-shaped stars blink through the trees. In recent years, as archaeologists revisit the ruins with new methods and local voices, they've uncovered more clues. Soapstone fragments beneath burial sites, geometric carvings with spiritual meanings, and traces of red ochre used in sacred rituals. It suggests the birds were not just decoration, but active participants in religious life. They may have stood during funerals, during rituals of passage, and in moments where the veil between worlds thinned. And even now, the birds remind us that power is not always loud. It can be silent, patient, watchful. Let's pause here. Beneath the open sky, the mountain wind carries whispers we no longer understand, but still feel. One of the birds, for decades, remained in South Africa, taken from the ruins, separated from its flock. But in 2003, it was returned to Zimbabwe, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. And when it came home, elders said the spirits would now rest easier. Sometimes a stone can carry a soul. Sometimes returning an object returns a voice. Let's pause here. Even stone remembers where it belongs. So, what is the legacy of the soapstone birds? It is not in their material, not in their weight or color, but in what they hold. They hold questions, they hold echoes, they hold truths that words struggle to carry. They remind us that African civilization is not only found in tombs and pyramids, but in symbols, in totems, in the sacred relationship between people, land, and spirit. As we sit here, beneath stars that once shone on the stonemasons of great Zimbabwe, perhaps we too are being watched, not by gods of fire and lightning, but by birds who do not fly, but never sleep. Let's pause here. The birds close their stone eyes, and the night grows still. Spirit walls, sacred geometry, ritual, and sound. We have walked among the birds, watched by eyes carved in stone. Now we descend deeper, not into the earth, but into meaning, because the ruins of great Zimbabwe were never just stones piled for shelter. They were a language, a belief, a presence. They whispered secrets through geometry, through echoes, through sacred silence. This was a city that sang, even when no one spoke. Let's pause here. A breeze rises, carrying stories through the gaps in the old stone walls. The great enclosure, an elliptical wall nearly 250 meters around, stands without mortar. Every granite briquette by hand was placed with patient precision. No glue, no cement, only balance, only trust. These walls have outlasted kingdoms because they were not built fast. They were built right. But look closer, and you'll see that these walls aren't merely practical, they are spiritual instruments. The shapes curve, spiral, shift in rhythm. Some passages narrow deliberately, forcing you to turn your body sideways, as if humbling yourself before entering a sacred place. Others open suddenly into sunlit courtyards, like revelations after ritual. Researchers have noticed something strange, a feature both simple and profound. When you clap your hands in certain chambers, the echo bounces back like a drum. Boom, boom, boom. 3 beats, sometimes 4. Never the same twice. This is not coincidence. Great Zimbabwe's builders understood acoustics, sound, vibration, resonance. Some now believe these echo chambers were designed to respond to ritual singing, to enhance the voices of spirit, mediums, and priests. Let's pause here and listen. Even silence tells stories in the right setting. In the stillness of these courtyards, elders would gather in twilight hours. They didn't sit in rows. They didn't speak over one another. Instead, they allowed the space to breathe, to echo, to witness. These were not political meetings, but spiritual ones, because the walls themselves were alive, not in the way trees are, but in the way drums are, hollow, waiting, resonant. And when the voices of the living met the spirits of the stone, a kind of balance was restored. Let's pause here. A single ember glows brighter before fading gently, like memory. There are patterns etched into some of the stones. Chevron shapes, zigzags, cross-hatching. These are not decorative. They are codes. They mirror the weavings found in traditional baskets, the stitching in royal garments, the flows of rivers, the paths of migration. Some say they represent the female form. Others see snakes or lightning, but most agree they were sacred patterns, meant to remind people that all things in life, paths, pain, joy, rain, are cyclical. What rises, falls. What dies, returns. What is lost may be found again. Let's pause here. The spiral turns inward, and we follow slowly. When young men reached initiation age, they would be led to special chambers in the ruins, not with loud fanfare, not with beating drums, but with soft steps and older men beside them, whispering lessons not meant for public ears. Inside the enclosure, they would learn stories not found in songs. They would hear of the ancestors, of battles never carved into walls, and of spirits who linger in the quiet places they would leave changed. Not because of what they had heard, but because of where they had stood. Great Zimbabwe did not give answers. It gave perspective. Let's pause here. In this stillness, a boy becomes more than a name. He becomes part of a line. Women, too, had sacred pathways. Certain corridors of the complex were known as mothering paths. Routes that only women walked during rites of fertility or mourning. At night, they would light marula oil lamps, singing songs that echoed softly through the dry air. No one wrote these rituals down. They were passed voice to voice, generation by generation, held in wombs, held in stone. And still today, in the nearby villages, the women remember. They hum melodies that once bounced off granite walls. They wear cloth in patterns found in the carvings. They step softly as their grandmothers taught them. Let's pause here. The feminine carries not just life, but memory, quietly and beautifully. If you look closely at the placement of the great enclosure, you'll notice it aligns with celestial points. At the solstice, the sunlight pierces certain gaps between the stones, casting long shadows that mark the change of season. This suggests an ancient calendar, a spiritual clock carved into the bones of the earth. So when people say Africa has no history, no science, no order, they have not stood here on this hill at sunrise. Let's pause here. Even the stars had a seat at this council of stone. The sounds, the shapes, the symbols, all fed into one purpose: harmony. This wasn't just a city of trade, gold, and cattle. It was a place where sacred architecture shaped sacred thought. The walls didn't just hold people in. They held belief, held ritual, held a kind of music made not of notes, but of resonance. And today, though no priests chant from within, and no young men trace the chevron lines with calloused fingers, the feeling remains. You can still feel it. A hum, a weight, a presence, the soul of stone. Let's pause here. Beneath the moonlight, everything stills, even time itself. The ancestors still whisper, spiritual memory in the landscape. The stars hang low tonight, and the air carries a hush, not silence, but something deeper. It is the sound of memory, because long after the last stones were laid, and the traders departed, and the gold caravans grew quiet, something remained here, not in books, not in maps, but in the land itself. great Zimbabwe was never just a kingdom of stone. It was a kingdom of ancestral breath. Let's pause here, just for a heartbeat, to feel the earth beneath our feet. It remembers more than we do. When the wind rushes across the plains outside the ruins, you might think it's only the grass whispering. But to the Shona people, this land's guardians, it is more. They say the spirits of the Vadzimu, the honored dead, ride that wind. They live in the trees, in the rock faces, in the slow creaking of the wooden door that opens nowhere. They do not startle. They do not demand. They watch. They are not gone. They are folded into the land like smoke into cloth. Let's pause here. We bow our heads slightly, not from fear, but from reverence. Among the local elders, there's a saying, Wafa Wanaka. He who dies becomes beautiful, not because the dead change, but because our vision does. When people return to the ruins to offer prayers, they do so not with loud mourning, but with quiet intention. They bring snuff, pour out sorghum beer, whisper the names of ancestors into the stone crevices. Names are bridges. Saying them keeps the dead close and keeps the living rooted, because in the Shona world, history is not a story in the past. It is a presence in the now. Let's pause here. Our breath slows, and we remember those who walked this land before us. Even today, the villagers who live near the ruins don't go there casually. They wait for permission from elders, from dreams, from the land itself. Some say the Amanda Lion spirits still guard the sacred hill. They appear in dreams, or sometimes in the shadow between two rocks, watching. A woman once dreamt of a lion who spoke in her grandmother's voice. When she awoke, her goats had circled the hill 3 times, as if pulled by something unseen. She took this as a sign. She offered tobacco at sunrise, and for months after, her crops grew thicker than ever before. Let's pause here. The dream realm and the waking world overlap, like hands in prayer. Not all memories are kind. Some say that after the kingdom's decline, the ruins became too sacred, too heavy with sorrow, too loud with echoes. British colonial explorers dismissed the site as savage rubble. They chiseled away artifacts, looted sacred spaces, and even questioned whether black Africans could have built it at all. In their arrogance, they erased truths the stones never forgot. And yet, through this violence, the people still remembered. They kept the songs alive, kept the names alive, kept walking the same paths, planting the same herbs, telling the same stories around fires. Let's pause here. History can wound, but memory heals if we carry it with tenderness. Today, some of the soapstone birds have been returned. Others remain in museums far away, their wings clipped by glass cases. But in great Zimbabwe, the spirit of the birds never left. Villagers still carve replicas, not for tourists, but for home altars, for family shrines, for tombstones. Each one a call, a song, a reaching toward what was. These are not souvenirs. They are promises that the ancestors will not be forgotten, that what was stolen will be sung back into being. Let's pause here. Wings may be carved in stone, but memory gives them flight. Some researchers believe Great Zimbabwe was a pilgrimage site, not just for leaders and traders, but for seekers of wisdom. And even now, modern pilgrims arrive, not with incense, but with questions. They come from universities, from villages, from the diaspora. They come to touch the walls, to feel something beyond data, to remember that history is not just what happened, but what still echoes. Because as long as someone listens, the ancestors will whisper. Let's pause here. You are part of the story too, simply by listening. The night deepens. The fire is low now, but the story continues, carried in wind, in stone, in spirit. Great Zimbabwe is more than a ruin. It is an echo of what was possible. A civilization built with no mortar, only intention, only reverence, only memory. And long after this video ends, after you drift into sleep, the ancestors will still be here, still whispering, still waiting. Let's pause here and thank them with silence before we journey to the Citadel of Kings. From the hill complex, life as the rulers lived it, let us now ascend. Not in haste, not in pride, but with quiet footsteps, up toward the hill complex, a citadel of power, a place where breath ran thin, but authority ran deep. In the world of Great Zimbabwe, to rise above the people wasn't just symbolic, it was spiritual, it was divine. Only the king and his closest attendants lived at the top. The rest, they looked up from below, their heads bowed not just to the sky, but to the man they believed had one foot in this world, and one in the realm of the spirits. Let's pause here. The climb is steep, and we gather our breath beneath a marula tree. The hill complex is a cluster of natural rock outcrops, woven together with carefully placed stone walls. No mortar binds them, yet they've stood for centuries. Why? Because they were laid with ritual knowledge. Stones were chosen, not just for size, but for meaning, for sound, for story. One path curves around a boulder, shaped like a crouching lion. Another ends in a narrow slit barely wide enough for one person to pass. This was not accident. It was design. Each pathway filtered the unworthy. Each staircase prepared the soul. Let's pause here. The rocks themselves feel like ancient witnesses, watching us as we climb. At the summit, the air changes. Cooler, quieter, heavier. From here, the entire valley is visible. Granaries, villages, stone walls, curling like smoke across the land. The king called the Mumba would rise each morning to this view. He would not walk among the people unless the stars approved. He would not speak unless the ancestors agreed. For the Mumbo was not just a man. He was mediator. He was channel. He received dreams that shaped law. He gave blessings that ensured rain. He heard disputes, then spoke as if the voice of the land itself. Let's pause here. Power can be heavy, but here it is also sacred. The Mumbo's daily life was tightly written. He did not eat ordinary food. His meals were prepared in silence, by women chosen for purity of bloodline and spirit. He never drank from communal pots, only from carved vessels, wrapped in leather charms. Each sip a ceremony, each meal an offering. His sleep quarters were lined with bird feathers, often eagle or hornbill, symbols of far vision, sharp instinct. No one entered without permission, not even his own sons. Let's pause here. Inside these walls, even dreams are governed by tradition. One of the king's most sacred roles was to protect the royal cattle. More than food, more than wealth, they were considered extensions of the people's soul. A king who lost cattle in disease or war was said to have lost his spiritual balance, so pens were built within the hill complex. Special songs were sung to the bulls at night, and when calves were born, their afterbirth was buried under ceremonial stones to ensure fertility in the land. A quiet belief, tender and old. If the cows are well, the kingdom is well. Let's pause here, a gentle moment to honor how animals and people shared destiny. Not all was peaceful. Beneath the rituals and poetry, the Mumbo lived in constant watchfulness. Assassins could climb the hill under the cover of mist. Poison could be slipped into his maize porridge. Even birdsong could carry coded messages. So the ruler never slept in the same hut 2 nights in a row. He had 5 houses, each placed at different cardinal directions. No one knew which one he'd choose until nightfall. Even his sandals left false tracks, 1 foot dragging, to confuse enemies about his strength. And always nearby were the Mudzamu warriors, his personal guard sworn to die before letting harm reach him. Let's pause here. Leadership, too, has its loneliness, its endless watch. Despite the danger, the hill complex was not a place of gloom. It echoed with music. Ceremonial drums, called ngoma, beat out rhythms known only to the priesthood. Flutes carved from reed whispered through the stones, and women sang in harmonies as ancient as rain. Songs to greet the moon, songs to mark the harvest, songs that praised the Mumbo's ancestors by name, each name a note, each note a spell. Children born to royal concubines learnt these songs before they could walk. Because in this citadel, words were currency, music was law. Let's pause here. The music drifts like mist, softening even stone. The ruler's final duty was to die well. When a king sensed his time was near, he would retreat to a secret chamber deep in the hill. There, he would be bathed in herbs, wrapped in lion hide, and speak one last prayer, not for himself, but for the rains, for the land, for the unborn. His body would then be buried upright, facing east toward the rising sun, so that even in death, he watched over his people. His bones became part of the hill. His spirit joined the ancestors, and a new king would climb not just the hill, but the sacred silence he left behind. Let's pause here to honor the stillness that follows a life of sacred duty. So the hill complex was not just a fortress, it was a crown of earth, a poem in granite, a place where breath and sky and stone met in delicate balance. And as you drift deeper into this slow evening, imagine yourself there, feeling the breeze, hearing the echoes, and knowing that once, long ago, power did not roar. It whispered. Let's rest here for now. For in the next chapter, we bring all stories together and begin the gentle path toward dreams. Beneath the stars, history sleeps. The fire has burned low now. Its glow flickers gently on your closed eyelids, and the voices of time grow quieter, like echoes fading into the hills of memory. We have wandered deep tonight, through stone chambers, through forgotten tunnels, through dust sweat, and sacred silence. And what have we found? Not just stories, but lives. We began beneath the earth, where the gold that once adorned kings' necks was torn from the soil by trembling hands. We felt the weight of each swing of a miner's chisel, the dryness in the throat, the tremor in the spine, the silence that followed every distant rumble of rock. And we saw how even those who lived in darkness carried within them the light of legacy. Let's pause here. The stars are gathering overhead, and we breathe in their silence. We walked then through the birth and ruin of a city made of dreams and stone. Great Zimbabwe, built without mortar, yet held together by memory. Its towers once touched sky. Its walls once sang of unity. Its courtyards once rang with trade, prayer, and laughter. And yet, even the greatest stone can crumble. Even the proudest kingdom must bow to time. But the spirit, the spirit, it lingers in every stone still standing, in every child who speaks Shona, in every bird that circles above the ruins, as though guarding something too sacred to name. Let's pause here. The past sleeps beneath the surface, but it has not disappeared. We sat before the mystery of the soapstone birds, quiet guardians, carved with care, whose beaks and wings spoke in symbols, not words. Were they royal, religious, spiritual, perhaps all, perhaps more? Their truth may never be known fully, but in their mystery there is comfort. Because not all things are meant to be explained. Some are meant to be felt. And tonight, under this vast African sky, they watch over us still. Let's pause here. The fire crackles gently, and the stone speaks without sound. And finally, we climbed. Higher and higher, until the land fell away and only the wind remained. We stood among kings. We stood where dreams were law, where cattle were prayers, where silence was power. The hill complex, not a castle, but a shrine. The king's breath was not just his own. It was the pulse of the people, and his resting place, a whisper to the sun. We understood, finally, that in this kingdom, leadership was not noise, it was balance. Let's pause here. You are safe, still, and surrounded by 1,000-year-old peace. So what now? Now we sleep. With stone beneath us and sky above us, we sleep knowing we carry these stories, not as burdens, but as blessings. History is not meant to keep us awake with its noise. It is meant to soothe, to remind us of our place in a longer rhythm, one that began long before us and will continue long after. Tonight, the gold remains in the hills. The birds remain on their pedestals. The walls still stand, as do the echoes of the people who built them. And you drift now into dreams, with ancient voices cradling your thoughts, and the hush of time tucking you in. Good night, traveler. Sleep well, child of stone and stars.